Being human.
Well, we can't have a discussion about Greta Thunberg's activism without bringing up the topic of climate change. And according to an article in Newsweek, psychologists warn parents and guardians about being climate change alarmists, noting an increasing number of children who are being treated for eco-anxiety. Now, researchers and psychologists in the United Kingdom say children are commonly being subjected to a barrage of concerns about the future of the planet and environmental doom. But these same researchers and psychologists say they don't want the rising eco-anxiety, this social phenomenon in children, to be classified as a mental illness because it is a, quote, rational fear, unlike the causes behind most standard anxiety issues. Frank, what do you make of this eco-anxiety and, how should we address it or how should we view it?
I have two thoughts on this. Number one, I like the article and I like the approach in that I think what they're saying is you have ongoing conversations and the conversations aren't doom and gloom. And it's best if the parents have these conversations, but it is a series of conversations. It's a dialogue. And what I like about it is it applies to everything else. It applies to how to manage money. It applies to sexuality. It applies to politics. And it underscores the fact that we need to have these conversations with kids on an ongoing basis, which also emphasizes the fact that you have to have a good relationship with a kid as a parent or a friend to be able to have these chats. I know that this environment is a whole lot different from when I was growing up because our conversations were about nuclear war and we are going to get wiped out at any minute. And we had our nuclear fallout shelter in the school and would do drills of getting under the table. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. I'm going to get under a table in a mushroom cloud. Like this table is going to protect me from a mushroom cloud that blasts bricks off buildings.
Absolutely.
And nobody talked about it. You would see it on the news, but nobody would talk to me about it. And I see it. I talk to my daughter about this pretty regularly, and she's approaching this anxiety, which she does have, but with activism. I don't use plastic straws anymore. I have metal straws, and I recycle, and she's taught me a lot about it. But it's came through conversations, I guess.
So I agree with the having conversations piece. I guess I'm genuinely curious. So because you didn't have conversations about the mushroom clouds potentially happening, which was more immediate potential as opposed to the climate threat being something that could be 10 years, tomorrow, we don't know. It's not clear. Did you feel less anxious because you weren't talking about it?
I felt way more anxious.
Oh, okay.
Because there was nothing to talk about, and all you saw were movies of just people getting wiped out. And you saw the adults as the ones that are screwing everything up, which is the case now. But I would have preferred somebody to sit down and have a chat with me about this. This is the likelihood. This is what the Cold War means. This is deterrence. I didn't understand any of it.
But you had nobody that would talk to you.
That is true, except for my imaginary friend named Friend.
We're going to be nice to Frank today. But no, because the reason why I asked that is simply because, when we have these ongoing conversations, I think a lot of times kids are much more perceptive and aware of larger societal, cultural issues than we give them credit for. And so when, they're getting bombarded with news information and constant stuff on social media that parents aren't always privy to, if we aren't having these conversations, it makes perfect sense that they would be anxious and they assume that, the worst is going to happen when the reality is the future is so uncertain. We don't know what exactly is going to happen with this 1 degree increase and the global temperature. We know it's not going to be good, but we just don't know what it looks like. And, I would like to think we still have time to make change. But it's going to be hard. So
I'm just hoping the dinosaurs come back. That'd be cool.
Well, there's maybe. I don't know.
Never know.
Either that or...
What did you say? You say maybe?
I don't know. Yeah, I did.
Maybe?
I did say maybe. Well, things could evolve. They're going to have to if we're getting into a very tumultuous climate.
Hey, Dave, you want to jump in here and rescue this table here?
From the dinosaur conversation? I do have a question, though, because it's kind of along the lines of what Emma Kate's talking about. But, in in past generations, they were afraid of something big, catastrophic, and immediate that was going to happen, like a nuclear bomb, missile, that kind of thing. Even 20 years ago, 9/11, it was about a terrorist attack, and that was about a decade's worth of anxiety for kids. So my question is, and this is, first let me just preface it by saying, I think climate change is a real thing. I think it's something that is worth our attention. I think it is something that is a legitimate threat. But like Emma Kate's talking about, it's something that is 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 75, we don't know. Why do you think that and not something that's more catastrophic in immediate is a source of anxiety for this generation of kids? Why that?
Well, I feel like people, and this is again my perspective, where it's like there's a misconception between the idea of weather, which is like your day to day, versus climate. And I think people equate the two, which is inaccurate. So like if we're viewing the weather as this kind of catastrophic moment, we have a tornado come down and destroy your home. That feels very sudden, obviously. But then climate is something where cumulatively over decades, they can see a trend and a pattern. And so it's harder to put your finger on the one thing other than the fact that we know burning forest and fossil fuels are what's contributing to that. Like if I was doing some research for this, and if you take out all the standard things that might cause a typical fluctuation in the temperature of the Earth, and even then, somebody said something, and I can't remember who to quote it, but it's like thinking less about the heat and the temperature and thinking more of it as energy. And like this energy is being absorbed into our oceans, into our atmosphere, and it's going to create and cause more radical weather patterns that are a broader reflection of the climate. So I don't think I really answered your question now that I've said that.
Right.
But
we had an excellent education there.
But I do think that was important information.
It is important information, but it didn't answer the question. And the question
You're right,
is,
and I acknowledge that.
If you look at previous generations, the thing that they're worried about, even during the Cold War, even though that could have been a gradual kind of takeover, it was really the Cold War anxiety was around like they're going to have missiles in Cuba and bomb us ultimately, or take over in a moment. This is something that feels like could be an issue in a very meaningful way in their lives a decade from now or 5 decades from now. And again, I'm not saying it's not a problem. I'm just saying it feels unusual for children to think about something that's a threat that's that far off. Any thoughts about why?
Well, I think that, right now, if you wanted to come up with a parallel to the Cold War or nuclear attack, that would be the day-to-day fear and anxiety that children have about school shootings and mass shootings, because that.
But what I'd argue, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's still a thing that is going to could happen in a moment. Like it's something that's like a.
Yeah, and that's why I think that's a
climate
stronger
change
parallel.
Is like there's a thought that it's going to happen in a moment. Like all of a sudden we're going to wake up one morning and that's the moment it all happened. It's just a gradual thing.
I'd kind of disagree, because I think what this generation is acknowledging is that this is a problem, and that they're calling out the adults that you have overlooked this problem, and you're waiting until it becomes catastrophic before you do anything, and at that point it's too late.
Well,
and so I think that my children and their peers are saying, listen, this has already happened. It's really about slowing down and reversing so that we never have a catastrophic, because if that happens, it's too late, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be at the prime of their age in life that's having to deal with that. And so this is just as much an issue as I think it's calling out previous generations. Some of it may have been ignorance. Some of it, like I didn't grow up ever hearing much about this or thinking about it. To me, environmentalism began and ended with the ozone layer. Like that's the thing in that regard. But
don't spray any hairspray.
Yeah, don't use Aquanet or things along those lines.
Aquanet. Well, yeah. Okay, so I buy that, and I'm actually really glad for that. Like, I'm glad this is a generation of kids that cares about that and is looking in the future and is concerned about that. What I'm trying to get at is when we're talking about this eco-anxiety, we're talking, I mean, like there are reports of kids that are having trouble sleeping. They're having anxiety symptoms now. That's the piece that I'm
Let me give it a shot.
Go ahead.
All these things we're talking about have something in common, like nuclear war, school shootings, climate change. These kids have no real control over it. And I think that lack of control and things happening to them and them being children and not really being able to do anything contributes. But the difference between what I think this generation is doing is what Hedderly is talking about is while they don't feel they don't feel powerless like the way I did. That anxiety is still there, but they're starting to believe they can have an impact on something. And that's why it's become, I think, a bigger, more global issue for kids.
Thanks for watching this Being Human segment from the Shrink Tank podcast. To watch the full episode, click here, or to check out previous episodes, click here.